everyone, and welcome to another joyous episode of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Russell Glasser, and with me today is my co-host, Don Baker.
Hi, good to be here.
And a very special guest, Kathleen Johnson from
Hello.
the American Atheists.
Yep, great, thank you.
Today is Sunday, March 7th, 2010. We are a live call-in public access television show based in Austin, Texas. We take calls from the local Austin area and as well as from all over the world due to our live internet stream. The Atheist Experience is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a non-profit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can find out more by visiting www.atheist-community.org. When you do, be sure to check out the fact page for answers to frequently asked questions that we receive on the show. This show is live every Sunday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Central Time on Austin Access Channel 16. If you'd like to watch us live outside of Austin, simply visit the Atheist Experience website, www.atheist-experience.com. Click on Live Stream at the top of the page. You can also participate in a chat room during the show. Also at the website, you'll find audio and video from past episodes. If you click Archive, you will find a list of programs that includes links to both audio and video downloads, as well as a rapidly updated podcast. You can catch fan-selected clips of the Atheist Experience on YouTube, and you can see full episodes of the show at blip.tv, as well as subscribing to the aforementioned podcast. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast, another podcast called The Nonprofits, Prophets. Visit nonprofitsradio.com for more information. The next episode will be aired on Saturday, 2 weeks from now. There was no episode today. This is an off week, so actually, I'm sorry, it would be next week. Weekly meetings for the Atheist Community of Austin are hosted at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road from 11:30 to 1 every Sunday, except for the first Sunday of each month when we host our lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. Today was a lecture day, and the lecturer was Kathleen Johnson. The next one will be held on April 11th with the speaker and topic yet to be announced. If you can't make it to the morning meetings, you can always join us for dinner right after this very program, beginning at around 6:30 every Sunday. Most of the people involved with the production of the Atheist Experience will head for Threadgill's Restaurant at 301 West Riverside Drive in South Austin. Come on down, experience some Austin culture, and say hi to all of us, both in front of and behind the camera. Finally, the ACA also hosts an Atheist Happy Hour every Thursday, beginning at around 7 p.m. at the Dog and Duck Pub, located at the corner of 17th and Guadalupe. If you'd like to get in touch with us but don't feel like calling in, you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. We realize that not everybody who wants to call can make it in, but a surprising number of the huge volume of emails that we receive on the show actually do get a response from somebody who gets them. So feel free to write in tv@atheist-community.org. Be sure to check out the unofficial show blog at atheistexperience.blogspot.com, as well as the comprehensive counter-apologetics wiki at ironchariots.org. A couple of special announcements before we move on to the good stuff. March 7th, Joe Zemecki, who is an ACA member and co-founder of Atheists Helping the Homeless and the Texas State Director for American Atheists, will be giving a lecture for CFI. Check the ACA calendar for details on that. Also, the ACA pub crawl is coming up. It has been scheduled for Saturday, March 20th, and we have these lovely shirts that our spokesmodel Don is showing off. Everybody will be wearing those and leaving at 6:30 from the Dog and Duck Pub, 406 West 17th Street. The area well known to regulars of the.
So part of the fun
hours.
is there'll be a whole herd of people there, all wearing the same shirt, and we'll just go and let everybody know that, hey, there's a lot of atheists in Austin.
Scaring the heck out of a bunch of drunks.
We like to have fun and have some drinks. Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Anyway, is that all the announcements? I believe that's all. So these are pause bars for people who want to skim through the show on the internet because they don't like listening to the boring announcements every week.
Yeah, a lot of our viewers are from out of the local area, and so they're not too interested in the local announcements.
So as I said, Kathleen Johnson is here. You are the Vice President and Military Director for American Atheists. I don't know if you want me to say all this stuff.
Whatever you want.
Okay, I'll keep going. Kathleen started her career as an atheist activist by founding the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers, or MAAF for short, and serving as the organization's first president. After stepping down as MAAF president in 2001 to take a more active role with American Atheists, she assumed the position of military director and coordinated American Atheists' support of atheist military members and veterans. She was ultimately appointed to American Atheists' board of directors and accepted appointment as one of 2 vice presidents. Ms. Johnson served in the military for 23 years before retiring in 2008 and was an outspoken atheist for most of her career. She currently works as a Department of the Army civilian at Fort Hood, Texas. That was a mouthful.
And Kathleen, you are our speaker today, and one of the reasons you came and spoke to us is you got to do something very unusual.
I did. It was.
And I'm jealous.
It was extraordinary.
Okay.
American Atheists is a partner member of the Secular Coalition of America. And the Secular Coalition of America recently, as in just a little more than a week ago, on 26 February, managed to get us a briefing with members of the Obama administration. It's very historic. No administration has ever met with a secular or non-theist group of any type. And we were invited to participate, and we got to brief us and our partner organizations in the Secular Coalition of America got to brief the Obama administration on several issues of interest to the coalition. And those issues were preventing the medical neglect and abuse of children based on religion, preventing proselytizing in the military, and the Obama administration's support for faith-based initiatives. Those were the 3 primary issues that were addressed.
Boil it all down to three main issues. Huh?
That's right. Now we know there's a lot more issues out there of interest to the community, but they gave us an hour and a half, so the Secular Coalition had to focus.
Who was it that showed up there?
There were representatives there from the Department of Defense, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Justice were represented.
And Obama himself wasn't there, though.
No, in spite of the rumors you might have heard on the internet when some of the evangelical outcry occurred about meeting with, about the Obama administration daring to meet with non-theist organizations. Obama did not join us for coffee or anything else.
Said you guys got special treatment.
That's what he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, even though it's nice to be heard. So can you maybe talk about each of those 3 issues and why they're important and maybe why those were chosen?
I don't know, from the Secular Coalition, I wasn't involved in the process of choosing about why those issues were chosen, but all 3 issues are obviously important. As it stands right now, states are allowed to medically exempt, are allowed to apply a medical exemption when parents can vaccinate or parents when children are sick and need medical treatment. They can apply a medical exemption as a defense to abuse, basically. Children who they can say that children don't need to be vaccinated because of the religious beliefs of the parents, and the religious parents have the option of not getting medical treatment for their children on the grounds that faith healing is apparently, in their minds, is potent and is viable a medical treatment as actual medical treatment. And children
or Christian scientists,
Christian,
right?
yes, particularly Christian scientists, right? So children are being injured and they're dying as a result of that particular belief system. And then the second issue was proselytizing in the military. You know, the military is a very confined population, and we rely a lot on esprit de corps and unit cohesion. And because we're such a confined population, it makes it easy for non-theist service members to be subjected to having to endure the religious proselytizing from leaders and chaplains, and occasionally sometimes there's repercussions when service members fail to adopt the belief practices of their commander or chaplain.
There's a conflict of interest issue there, right?
Yeah, in many ways. And then the third issue was the Obama administration's continued support, which carried over from the previous administration for faith-based initiatives. And the SCA the Secular Coalition of America has argued that if you're an organization that's going to accept federal money, then you should not be allowed to discriminate for hiring and providing services, and there shouldn't be any strings attached to receiving services, like having to attend a church service to receive services. And those were the three main issues that were tackled.
What kind of feedback would you say you got to this? I mean, were there any participants there who seemed a little hostile to the idea, or?
Nobody seemed hostile. And I have to be careful what I say here, because they told us specifically that we could not repeat what the representatives of the administration said.
You've got sort of a non-disclosure agreement.
There is a non-disclosure agreement there. And the reason being is I understand what they were trying to create. They were trying to create somewhat of a free speech environment where the members of the administration could have a real dialogue with us without having to worry about sound bits coming back to haunt them.
So Jeff and I were on the show last week, and we were sort of joking that presidents or presidential administrations meet with crackpot groups all the time and just sort of smile and nod for a little while and say what they want to hear. Did you feel like it was that sort of thing, or did you feel like there might actually be some sort of result coming out of this?
Yeah, interestingly enough, where it seemed that we got the most positive result was from the representative that came over from the Department of Defense. It was actually very surprising, because I don't know what I expected. I didn't expect the administration to send somebody over who was senior, but they did. They sent somebody over, a civilian. Our leaders are civilians at that level, and they sent over a very senior civilian who's in charge of personnel policy, which includes the chaplains corps and a lot of other aspects of the personnel business of being in the military. And he seemed to get it. He seemed sympathetic with our issues. Before either myself or Jason Torpy, he's the current president of the Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers. Jason and I were the ones that were speaking on the military issues. Before either one of us got a chance to speak, he got to the representative, Mr. Bill Carr. He got to say his piece, and it was clear right off the bat that he seemed to get it. He seemed to understand the problem. He seemed sympathetic to our issues. He seemed willing to help us, and now it's just a matter of seeing what the follow-up's going to be. If it was real sympathy, or if it was lip service. So we'll see.
On the military issue, what were you arguing for? What would you like to have happen?
There were a couple of things that we were arguing for, and I'll hit some of Jason's points first. The big problem is right now in the military is 60% of the military's chaplains right now are evangelical Christians, and the other 40% making up every other faith group that's represented in the military population, and that's because the evangelicals have really in the last few years, especially since September 11th, have put in a big push to bring in evangelical chaplains, get them in uniform, and getting out there ministering to troops.
Are there any statistics on how many of the people that they're preaching to are already evangelical Christians? I mean, is this way out of whack with the military
Way out of
population?
whack. I don't know what the exact numbers are off the top of my head. They're on the MAAF website, but way out of whack. Just like, if you take a military population, the military population is a microcosm, basically, of the general population. And 60% of the general population in the United States is not evangelical Christian. So 60% of the population in the military is not evangelical Christian. But
it's worse than that, because the evangelicals have a kind of a mandate to proselytize, right?
That's the problem. That's where we're running
into issues. By the way, that website is maaf.info, is that correct?
Correct, thank you. Yeah, that's the problem, we've brought in all these chaplains now who believe they have a duty to bring the light of Christ to the service members that are under their sphere of control. And they believe that any attempt by the government to rein in that duty, to force them to do the job that they're supposed to do and minister to the needs of all the faithful under their sphere of control, they regard that as infringement on their personal religious rights. If you tell them, no, you can't pray to Jesus at this formation and have the soldiers in the formation pray to Jesus because you've got Jewish soldiers in the formation, you've got soldiers of other faiths, they see it as an infringement on their personal rights.
Well, and they answer to God, right?
They answer to God. They don't answer to, the commander.
Yeah.
Right.
God forbid you should answer to the commander.
What would be American Atheists' position on military chaplains? Do you think they should be abolished entirely, or are you just looking for a little bit more, moderation?
That's actually an issue we haven't tackled in an organized way because American Atheist takes their direction on how to handle military matters like chaplain matters for me because that's my job. I'm the military director, and they take my advice. We have a lot of members in our organization who are personally opposed to there being chaplains on the rolls. I personally am opposed to government-supported chaplains. But in the broader picture, being a military retiree, and after all those years on active duty, I understand the bigger picture is combat readiness. And if you've got service members in uniform who they believe they're more courageous, they believe they're better able to do their jobs, they believe they're better able to support their brothers and sisters in uniform when their religious needs are being met, then it could be argued that the forces have an obligation to meet those needs.
I guess it would be kind of a morale issue. I mean,
it is in a lot of ways.
If I could play devil's advocate for a minute, you get a college kid who goes, angel's advocate, we would say on the Atheist Experience. But you get kids who go off to college, and in general, they have access to every kind of church they could want. You ship someone off to Iraq, and there's probably not a lot of the kind of whatever church it is that they would want to go to.
Exactly. If you it's a morale thing. If you ship them overseas, if you ship them to the combat zones, or even if you station them in a small community, a lot of military bases, the towns around them are getting bigger, but a lot of military bases are still close to pretty small communities. There's no guarantee that service members' faith group's going to be represented out there. So that's what the chaplain's corps is for. But at the same time, if they're going to come in as a chaplain, they need to be prepared to service the entire population, not just their own particular faith group. And we have incidents reported to us all the time, and where service members have sought counseling they have the chaplain set up to do counseling, and where service members have sought, marital counseling is a good example because this happens all the time, and they'll sometimes, occasionally, the chaplain will get so wrapped around the axle about whether or not they've seen the light of Christ and are saved that they won't deal with the problem that they went there to take care of in the first place. And it's not right. And it was even worse even up until a few years ago, because until a few years ago, you could see a chaplain and have confidentiality, but you couldn't go to a mental health professional and have the same confidentiality. The mental health professional...
If you had problems, you'd be drawn toward the religious faith.
You had to be, especially if you had a security clearance, and you didn't want to lose your security clearance. If you went to a mental health professional, you were risking your security clearance because there was no guarantee of confidentiality. Now, that has changed in the past few years, but not because of a change in attitude towards religion and chaplains. It's changed because we've had more and more service members coming out of the combat zones needing treatment for post-traumatic stress and things. And you can't send a service member to the combat zone and then tell them they can never have a security clearance again because they needed treatment for post-traumatic stress. So that's what's brought about the change.
Okay.
So how are atheists affected by the current environment there in the military and the chaplains, and why were you fighting for the atheists?
Yeah, it's a commander driven in a lot of ways. We have a lot of service members are afraid to state that they're non-theists or atheists because they're afraid of repercussions from their commanders, and they have good reason to be wary of that, because we have a lot of evangelicals and I use evangelicals, I'm not talking about just evangelical Christians. I'm talking about people of very strong faith in several faiths, And but particularly with the evangelical Christians, they see it as their duty to bring their service members to the Christian light. So there's a big caution or a big wariness of coming out as a non-theist and risking repercussions from the commander.
And these are real repercussions.
Oh, these
right?
are real. Yeah, these repercussions are real.
Okay.
It doesn't, and I used an example in a couple of talks that I've given of the 3 service members that I know of just off the top of my head, who it became known around their units while they were downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan. It became known in their units that they were atheists, and they received so many threats from their own service members, their brothers and sisters in uniform, that they had to be sent back to the United States for their own safety.
So that just destroys the cohesion and esprit de corps and all
Right,
that.
and where these service members are usually identified is it'll be something, I mean, completely harmless, like just not wanting to participate in the pre-mission prayer, and not trying to stop the prayer, just not wanting to participate, and it ends up drawing the negative attention.
Well, as a church-state separation advocate, I got bells going off. It's like, why is there a prayer at all?
Exactly. There's prayer because the evangelical chaplains are having their units conduct these prayers before they go out on mission. And I challenge anybody who may call in today who's been in the service, if they were in a unit that went through an entire deployment in Iraq or Afghanistan and they weren't asked to do a pre-mission prayer, I would love to hear about it because
You think they all were?
I think most of them were,
It's
yes.
become very pervasive.
Yes.
So what do you
yes.
want to change? What would fix all this?
My particular hot button issue with the meeting that we had with the Secular Coalition of America was our equal opportunity system. And, again, there's so many issues we could have tackled, but we had to focus. We only had an hour and a half, and for the military piece, we had 20 minutes. So we really had to focus. And my particular hot button was the equal opportunity system. The equal opportunity system in the Department of Defense and in the subordinate services is a very powerful tool for redress if you've been discriminated against. But it's a tool that's mostly closed to us because non-theists are not identified as a category of people who are eligible to be discriminated against and therefore use the system for redress. If somebody is making an open-minded interpretation of the Department of Defense regulations, it's pretty clear that the intent was it was supposed to cover non-theists. But in a literal interpretation, and those of us in the military, for the most part, were a pretty literal
Kind of
bunch.
folks, right? Yeah.
For a literal interpretation, it is very, very easy to say that, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. I'm sorry your commander was picking on you because you're a non-theist, but you don't have grounds to make a complaint because non-theists are not protected. So we want just the
So
wording
you'd like
changed.
that put in there
Yeah.
to provide.
Yeah, we're talking
particular-
about adding a couple of words that would have a huge, tremendous
To
ripple
clarify
effect.
the intent of what you think was the original intent of the.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Seems like a small request to me.
It's a small request with the
would think so.
potential, which should be doable, I would think. And it's a small request with the potential
For a big impact.
for a big impact on just improving the lives and welfare of military non-theists.
So, I mean, the words may be minor, but they would actually give you a leg to stand on when it comes to somebody
Exactly.
comes and complains to you and you say, now we can point to specific language in there that says that this is against policy.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
great.
Well, I hope you're successful. When do you think you'll know?
There's no telling. Myself and Jason Torpy, we're working on following up with the Department of Defense representative now. But we're talking about it, maybe just a couple word change, but anybody familiar with the government bureaucracy knows that no change comes quickly. So we're just going to have to keep working on it.
This don't ask, don't tell for decades now, right?
We're just going to keep working on it, and hopefully something will happen.
I'm a little curious about what was said about the issue of kids getting improper medical treatment. I mean, having approached the government, obviously there's a particular thing that you would like them to do about that. What I'm wondering is, like, you have Richard Dawkins, for instance, saying raising a kid in a particular religion is child abuse. And we've had some hotly debated,
Sure.
some hot debates right here within the Atheist Community of Austin about whether it's okay to go that far or where you draw the line. What kind of points were made about this issue?
The Secular Coalition of America's position on this is that it should never be allowable for a parent to deny medical care for a sick or injured child in lieu of, or never be able to deny medical care for a sick or injured child and substitute prayer as the sole medical treatment. And the SCA's position is it's going to take something at the federal level, because right now it's left up to the states whether or not to have a religious exemption and to apply a religious exemption.
This is a tough issue, right? Because you're coming between a mama and her cubs.
Very, very, very tough.
Right.
And the lady at the briefing who was supposed to illustrate that point, she couldn't make it. I mean, it was rough all getting to the SCA thing, because the weather up north, it's not like Texas weather. The weather up north was a challenge, and the lady who was going to speak didn't make it, actually, because of the weather. So a representative from the Secular Coalition read her statement.
There was maybe some minor precipitation that week.
Yeah, and when they start talking about snow measured in feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they were dealing with up there. But they read her statement. It was very moving. This was a woman who had a major bone infection as a child that would have been easily treatable with antibiotics, and instead it left her bedridden for a year. And then by the time
she's a victim of this particular
exactly,
thing.
And by the time because her parents were Christian Scientists, and they believed in the whole laying on hands, healing with prayer, and everything. And to make a long, poignant, moving story short, it ultimately ended up with her having to have her leg amputated as an adult.
It's completely unnecessary.
Right, because it was something that would have been easily treatable with antibiotics. And her particular experience was in the 70s, but it's still happening. You still read about these cases where children die of appendicitis and other diabetes and other
Well, that's
easily
another big one, right?
treatable conditions, or they die just in horrible deaths, and they use the religious exemption as a defense.
Okay. Well, we have some calls lined up, and I'm actually going to take calls in the reverse order that they were received, because the last two callers are from Austin, and both of them seem to have relevant things to say on this particular issue. So we're going to start with Al, who wants to talk about his experience being an atheist in the military. Al, are you there? I'm going to put Al on hold.
Hello?
I don't know if it's...
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
are you there, Al?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. My name's not Al, though.
Oh.
So I guess you got the wrong person, or...
What is it?
Can I, just ask a question? I mean, or do I have to be on topic here?
No.
You don't have to. I guess Al dropped. So...
Okay. I just found your show, a few weeks ago, and I grew up in a Christian household, and I was taught to that Jesus is my Savior, and et cetera, but when I got older, I realized something here isn't right. Something doesn't make sense, and I consider myself an atheist, but sometimes, it's the whole Christian thing has been programmed into my brain, and it's hard to get that out. And I was wondering, is there something I can do, or, because I don't want to, I always wonder, well, you know what, I don't think there's a God, but what if there is? What if I'm wrong, and I'm going to hell if I don't believe in Him? You know what I mean? You see what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as it turned... Oh, shall I go?
Go ahead.
As it turns out, I guess both Russell and I have never been theists, but from what I've heard, it's a very difficult transition. That they do have their hooks in you, and they do play on the fear thing quite a bit. And I can empathize with what you're going through. My suggestion would just be to get yourself involved with a community of like-minded people, and step away from that as best you can. If you're here in Austin, we have a lot of resources. We have the Atheist Community of Austin, and we have the Center for Inquiry, and a couple of other groups as well. So you are where?
I live in Indiana.
Indiana? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are, if you look around on the web, if you look at our frequently asked questions page, there's actually a guide for finding local atheist groups. And if you don't find one, it's really not that hard to start one. You can create an advertisement on meetup.com, and with very little effort on your part, you can start to get a group of folks together, and you'll have this mutual support, and that
Right.
is very, very important.
We always say
Yeah.
that we always like to remind people that the ACA was started like 15 years ago now, I guess,
I
when the founding member put an ad in the newspaper saying, come meet for coffee if you're an atheist.
It's even easier now.
Right. Yeah, with the that interwebs thing that I've heard about.
Yeah.
So I guess Don's answer was hang out with more atheists. Like Don said, I've never been a theist, but I'm told that the best cures for sincerely believing this stuff are, one, actually reading the whole Bible. And two,
Well, I don't got the patience for that.
okay. Well, there are actually audio books with like famous actors on them. Those might be listenable. I mean, I don't know so much about the begat parts, but and the other thing is read about other religions instead, because there's a huge diversity of different crazy things that
Oh yeah,
people around
my
the world
dad's into
believe.
that Hindu stuff, Krishna and stuff. He's into that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
my mom's Christian, my dad's into that. So I'm being pulled both ways, and I want them to leave me alone.
A piece of good advice I got once, because I went to church when I was a kid. I tried very hard to be a Christian, and pretended to be a Christian for a long time because I wanted to be a Christian, and it just wasn't sticking. But somebody gave me a good piece of advice, because I kind of had the same thing that you described for a long time. What if I'm wrong? And somebody said if it's a choice between the Christian God versus not believing in anything, it's a dichotomy. It seems like a 50% chance of being right or wrong. But if you throw in all the other gods and goddesses that humans have believed in over history that also promised eternal damnation, it makes the odds a lot smaller, even for the religious people, that they picked the right one.
Right.
So, you're just as safe. It's just almost just a safe bet going with reason and being a non-theist.
Well, I'll definitely look up some people if I can. If not, maybe I can start my own and get a little group going, because it's really tough, feeling like you're the only one out there.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. It's easier than you might think.
When it comes to reading about some other religions, for a while I was a big fan of a blog called Kafir Girl. That's KAFIR girl.blogspot.com. She was like reading the entire Quran and blogging about the experience. She didn't get that far. I mean, she got pretty far, but then she sort of dropped off. But the blog's still around, and an entertaining read.
So that'd be an Islamic perspective, I guess.
Right.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for taking my call, and thanks for the advice.
No problem. Thanks
care.
for calling.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to try Jay in Austin. Are you there, Jay?
Yes, sir, I am.
What's on your mind?
I hadn't called y'all in a long time.
I recognize you.
Yeah, I
Hello.
know you.
I know you do. Well, my question would be this, because I'm a Korean vet. I'm also a Native American. I don't believe in the Bible, but I have my own, what Matt used to say, outlandish spiritual belief in a way. And,
Okay.
But anyway, what I was wondering, did she run across this in the service? Because I know when I was in Korea, we, as the Native American, was always put to the front to go out on patrol, because they said we had exceptionally good hearing and all of this. But when it came to going back to the church services, most of us had our own way of doing things, and I guess they thought we were stupid or something, but we had like more or less our own little powwows with our own fire and stuff like this, what we did. And there was another point. I am a gay man. So I was wondering about your guess. What did she run into in this similarity? But to us, I'll put it this way, like I say, if we were Native Americans, I always said we had better hearing, which I do believe in, and I felt like it was true. But they told us when we had to go to church, the Catholic priest come in. I just ignored him. Sometimes it looked like, what, you're rude or something. But I didn't want to be brought up into it, because I was brought up into the Christian church and pulled away from it after really studying it and everything. But also then, what was strange, I never openly admitted to being gay until it was late in life. But the gay guys that were open about it, they were made houseboys and waited on the officers in the quarters and stuff like that. And there's one or two of them up there that didn't have religion. They didn't believe in it, that were gay. And all this comes out. So, I mean, it's a circle. And being in the military like that, you did feel prejudice in the sense of what was brought against you, for as in being, you know, race-wise to me, and then also not being a religious person.
Okay. So what's your question for Kathleen, Jay?
Yeah, well, since she was in the military, what did she hear about any of this? Because now I understand that it's more open. Back there then, they didn't say nothing unless they really called them doing, you know, for houseboys and stuff like that.
So we're talking about ethnic minorities, we're talking about gays, and we're also talking about atheists all at the same time.
Yeah, it was all mixed together in that thing when I was there, so I don't know.
Maybe you can compare and contrast.
I could tell you right now, as it stands right now in the service, we haven't done any scientific studies on it, but I believe gays have it worse in the service than non-theists do. Because even when a non-theist is afraid to come out to their commanders, even when they feel like they have to hide who they are, there are no regulations prohibiting us from joining the service. And there's no regulations that automatically say if we admit to being non-theists, we have to be discharged from the service. And I spent most of my career in military law enforcement, and while I have heard of numerous non-theists being threatened and actions having to be taken because of those threats, I have never heard of a non-theist being injured because they were a non-theist. And that's not true with gays. There have been gays in the military, even people who maybe were not gay but were suspected of being gay, who have been injured and occasionally killed in a couple of very publicized stories, like what happened at Fort Campbell a few years ago. So right now, they've got a tougher row to hoe they got a tougher path than we do. But this don't ask, don't tell. That's all up for debate now. There's going to be some changes with regards to.
Hopefully soon.
I would think that if don't ask, don't tell gets repealed, that would make the legal issues easier, but it wouldn't stop what you were talking about regarding getting killed.
It's still a matter. It's one thing to change policy, but something completely different to change what's going on in people's heads. But you know, there are a lot of strong opinions on that issue in the military, but I have always been, just me personally, I'm not speaking for American Atheists or anything, me personally, I've always believed it's time to just drop the ban and let them in, because I don't believe in our current equal opportunity climate that it's right to let the bigots dictate the terms, basically. You need to set a standard. The standard is that they can come in and they can serve, and then it's up to the leaders to enforce the standard. You don't let the bigots dictate how the house is going to be run.
All right. Now, I'm sure that if you're an atheist, they can still come up with some other reason to get rid of you, but they can't come out and say, well, it's because
there's
you're
no
not
regulation that says if you're a non-believer, we have to chapter you out under this regulation and put you out of the service. There's nothing like that, and there is right now for gays.
And what about racial minorities? Is that problem largely solved in the military, or is it just like the rest of the United States?
Yeah, there's still, at least it's been my personal experience from my position as a non-commissioned officer in the Army. You know, I've never been in any other branch of service, so I can't speak so much for the other branches. But there are still individual instances of racism, because again, you know, it all comes down to people, and people are gonna say and do things. But as to systematic, organized racism, I think we have come a long, long way, probably ahead of, in some ways, of the civilian population of making progress there.
Too. Yeah.
Well, if we can go by the war movies that I've seen, every unit has to have a representative sample of a whole bunch of different minorities, and each one of them has to be a quirky stereotype of their particular.
That must be how it works, right? Yeah. Jay, did you have anything else?
There should be more or more atheist.
I was just
movies.
really curious as what went on, because it seemed like, well, we caught double duty being, like I said, Native American, because I always said we had better hearing. And had a lieutenant, it was real strange. He came and he always would confide in me on his problems. And he more or less thought, well, okay, so we didn't believe exactly like, because if he cheated on his wife, which a lot of them did over there, then they come back and they would say, well, maybe, hey, we had a different way of believing that his conscience wouldn't bother him so much, I think. And I mean, it was really strange what you put up with him when you were in the service, and it was so many ways, and I just said, crap. I didn't open up, didn't do nothing, and I just said, take it as it comes. And I thank y'all for listening.
All right,
Ooh,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Nice to hear from you again, Jay. See you later. Okay, looks like, Jason in Hampstead, Maryland has been waiting on the line for a while. Are you there, Jason?
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. I've actually been meaning to call in and ask Matt this, but I haven't seen him hosting for a couple weeks.
Yeah,
now,
I
so,
was here last week, even though it was an off week for me.
He was ill.
Sick.
He was ill.
He should be back next week, and but we'll see what we can do with your question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do either of you guys really know much about the historicity of Jesus?
Bits and pieces.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some talking, Matt and I. I mean, basically, I think the way that historians see it is that there's no particular reason to discount the existence of Jesus as a real person. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that there's strong evidence for it. It's just that when you go back that far into a past event, things become very, very sketchy. Generally, it's recognized that there is pretty much nothing that was written contemporary with the Bible that has any record of Jesus. I mean, everything that we get was from the Bible, and when you talk to apologists, they'll throw out examples like, Josephus, and people like that who lived like 100 years later, and they will duly record, and there were some Christians around this time who believed stuff about this guy named Jesus. I personally don't think that it matters that much if there was a guy named Jesus, because I've actually talked about this on the show before. Have you seen The Big Lebowski?
Yeah, but I don't really remember.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was
you're going to reference from that. I don't remember the movie too well.
Okay, well, I mean, there was this kind of wacky guy called the Dude, named who was that? Jeff Bridges, right? Yeah. So he was based on a real person. He was based on a friend of the director's, I believe. So you could say that Jeff Lebowski was a real guy. But then he does all this stuff in the movie. He gets in trouble with some nihilists who try to extract money from him. They pee on his rug. Some people get kidnapped. His friend gets shot, and they try to throw his ashes off a cliff. I mean, it's all comedy. None of it probably happened to Jeff Lebowski, or the guy that Jeff Lebowski was based on. But you could still say that he was a real guy. But that doesn't really tell us about whether any of the miraculous stuff in the Bible actually happened if there was a real Jesus, is kind of what I'm saying.
Well, and I can add to that there is a lot of situations where we know that there was embellishment, especially in early Christianity, where there were stories floating around, maybe even adapted from earlier religions, like earlier guys like Mithra and Atheists, where these stories were adapted and embellished and glued together and these sorts of things. And given that there was so much of this, and that it was sort of part of the culture, if you will, of the early church to embellish and to grow this thing, you have to wonder, that since they adopted that, can you trust anything there? And can you say anything concrete? And can you believe any claim that isn't, kind of anything more than a boring claim of, somebody drank some wine or whatever? So I don't know. The evidence for
Didn't
Jesus.
Paul actually say something specific to the effect that it's okay, or was it a later church elder who specifically said it's okay to lie as long as it leads people to what we consider the truth?
There is a quote by Martin Luther that says that God would love, go ahead and lie because God would love a lie that helped aggrandize him, and that's based on an earlier quote by Paul that's more ambiguous. It's in Romans, I can't remember, Romans chapter 3, I think, that basically says if God would benefit by a lie, wouldn't that be a good thing? It's kind of that flavor, but it's not real clear from the context whether he's using that as a positive example or a negative example. So it's ambiguous, but Martin Luther made it very clear. Go ahead and lie. Jesus will forgive your sins. But anyway, so there's a lot of lying, and so I just think that the whole thing is so screwed up that you can't find anything of any value there that would substantiate all the supernatural claims associated with Jesus. Just to sum up.
Hope that helps. Do you have any?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely can't. I can't disagree on it being kind of ridiculous in a lot of cases. But yeah, I guess that pretty much answers what I would have had.
Yeah, I mean, to answer,
I know that it is really unclear. I know that there could be no evidence, for a fact that he didn't exist. But I'd say that if there is, a pretty generally undisputed lack of evidence for his existence, then I'd say it's,
well, look up the something called the Jesus Seminar, which I understand is mainly concerned with looking into that question. But as far as I've
read, spent some years on that question.
Yeah, but as far as I've read about mainstream historians, basically the answer to your question is there is no strong doubt within the historical community that there was a person named Jesus, but nor is there strong backing by evidence. It's just sort of a default position.
And in a way, it almost doesn't matter, because it's a huge leap between, if there's a real person named Jesus, it's a huge, huge leap to say, okay, not only was there a real person named Jesus, he was also sacrificed on the cross and rose up to heaven after 3 days and did all these miracles. It's an impossible leap to make, and I think I'm fairly well read. I'm no expert, fairly well read, but I think the evidence for those things happening is pretty slim.
Right. At best, I think you could say that the Jesus of the Bible is a character loosely based on Jesus.
I understand there was also some recent evidence from archaeological digs that more or less concluded that Nazareth didn't exist at the time that Jesus was supposed to have lived. So if he was from Nazareth, this was a made-up story. So pretty much on every fact you can find some evidence against it, or every fact presented in the Bible, or every claim presented in the Bible, I should say, not fact.
Right. So. I was never a Christian, so I was never a Christian, so it's just as far as my understanding. Sorry, is someone else talking, or is there just an echo? Because I don't have
a little echo
There's
problem.
Sometimes some echo, yeah.
Try to ignore it if you can. If you're watching on the screen,
I just wasn't sure if I was talking over one of you guys. Like I said, I was never. I was raised Jewish actually, and so I don't really understand a whole lot about the Christian faith. But I mean, doesn't a lot of their faith kind of have its foundation in belief in the miracles that Jesus performed?
Sure.
Supposedly?
Yeah. Sure.
Well, so that's why what I would think would be the relevance of Jesus' existence, because obviously if there's not compelling evidence of his existence, it wouldn't be it wouldn't really make sense.
Well, yeah,
to say that
the history
may not have existed, did it, all these things.
The history of Christianity is a pretty big and complex topic.
It certainly doesn't end with the Bible being written.
No, not at all. I would say of the most important things, I would put Paul as the main advocate. Without Paul, there would be no Christianity. He championed it, and a lot of his beliefs are not the same beliefs as modern day Christians have. So Christianity has evolved a lot too. So yes, there is some roots back into these miracle claims and these resurrection claims and such, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're true.
Thanks for your call,
just for the
Jason.
record, who exactly is Paul, or was Paul?
Well, he was a character in the Bible who was real, and he was an advocate. He was someone who supposedly persecuted Christians for a time, and then supposedly had a conversion experience out in the desert. And one can argue that may have been just something like an epileptic seizure or something like that, and waited what, 6-8 years?
Paul wrote the majority of the last half of the New Testament.
Pauline epistles.
And
he's best known for his Pauline epistles.
yeah, in fact, I think he wrote most of the entire New Testament. No?
No. I mean, there's a bunch of the things in Acts and Thessalonians, Galatians.
Okay.
Yeah, so in Romans. Anyway, and even some of those are known forgeries, so you have to dig into the details of it. But the main point here is that he, was an itinerant preacher and went out on the road and actually, spread the word of the gospel and really got it going.
And he was a serious misogynist, but that's a topic for a whole nother show.
Yeah, a lot of things that he had problems with.
Jason, we got full lines, so I'm going to move on. Thanks for your call. And let's see, Lee in LaSalle is MI Michigan. Well, he gets to move to the front of the line because he said the magic words. He has proof for the existence of God. Lee, are you there?
Yeah. My phone got disconnected from the base.
Oh. Can you guys turn up the speaker or something?
Oh,
Hello?
I'm on.
Yes, you are on.
Oh, wow. My phone got disconnected from the base.
Okay.
I think I have evidence for God, at least his existence.
All right. Go for it.
Well, I've met him. I've shaken his hand, and his name is Phil Collins.
Amazing. You
Phil Collins
cheated.
exists.
You cheated to get to the front of the line now.
Yeah, I think there's actually proof of evidence of Phil Collins' existence, too.
Yeah, I've seen a picture or two even.
The proof that he's God is the song In the Air Tonight.
See, I thought it was Anita Baker, but
Okay.
I was confused.
Welcome. I've turned your life around.
All right, yes, I've seen the light, and thank you for the moment of levity. All right, bye. Let's see, calls, okay, so we had 2 open lines, and then I was just about to say that, and then they just fill up, so, keep trying. So right now we have Stephen in Clayton, North Carolina. Are you there?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine. I got a question for you, and I hope you have your computers ready because you might need to look some stuff up.
Oh, then that makes for great television.
Yeah, have you ever, I think it's called the hydroplate theory.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
So this
not
is like the
familiar with
world
that
blows up like
specifically.
the balloon and the plate tectonics.
Oh,
will
that
float around.
one. Oh my gosh.
Is this?
Yes.
Are you
Yeah.
are you the balloon guy?
The what?
Are you the balloon guy? Because there's a guy that has been on our show, that has called in our show, and has proposed this idea that the Earth was like a balloon and it blew up and got bigger somehow, and the tectonic plates were floating around on this balloon.
I do the internet search.
Is that anything like what you're talking about? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Not quite.
No,
I mean,
okay.
yeah, it's not, I do know what you're talking about, but yeah, that's not what
Okay.
exactly what I'm going to be telling you about. What it is though is that this is an argument I've heard from a creationist saying that that a lot of the ocean's water was once placed under the tectonic plates, and whenever God flooded the earth,
Yes.
it rose through the fault lines of the continents, and this is also explaining how Pangea separated.
Okay.
That flooded, and then that ran off into the cavities, which filled up the oceans and everything.
Well,
And
okay. 60, 70 years ago, there was this very then new theory of plate tectonics. There was this idea that these continents and things used to all fit together because you could kind of see how Africa could fit in, with North and South America and all that good stuff. And it was considered kind of a wild claim at the time.
Yeah, hugely controversial.
Hugely controversial claim. And the answer to both of these questions is extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And for this particular claim, there became extraordinary evidence. Well, they did soundings through the ocean floor and figured out that, hey, we do have this continental shelf, which is really the true division of where the continent is, not where the ocean is. And yes, these do fit together. And oh, by the way, we can actually figure out that these things are moving apart, and there's a rift, continental rift, where these plates are being pushed apart, and these where the plates are going underneath each other, mountains are building up, and all these things. And so this was a claim that was actually proven. So for this other claim that you're coming up with, where the water was underneath, the answer is, well, maybe that's true. I kind of doubt it. But what I would need is extraordinary evidence for that claim.
Right, and the nature of extraordinary evidence, and this is a good way to approach quasi-scientific claims in general, is that the first thing you want to ask is, has there been a peer-reviewed paper on this topic appearing in a mainstream scientific journal?
That's a good milestone for such a claim.
You might want to memorize that. But basically, I mean, the way science works is not a bunch of people just throwing out crazy ideas and then a bunch of other people say, hey, that sounds good, and then they all agree with it. The idea is that first they throw out the crazy ideas, which is a perfectly respectable part of science. And
they
then
get shot down brutally.
Yes,
Usually.
they submit it to a peer-reviewed journal, and the peer review means that some other guys who are in that same field will look over it and say, oh, you've got a whole bunch of flaws here. The actual evidence does or does not support this particular claim you made. And then if it passes this peer-reviewed process, it will show up in the journal, and then other scientists will decide how useful it is and maybe reference it as a way of explaining other things they found out. So the quality that makes a good scientific theory is sort of the same quality that makes an internet video go viral. It's sort of, when a bunch of people find it good enough to link to.
I don't like that
No,
analogy.
you don't like that.
It's like, no.
Okay. But with a grounding in education and evidence.
Okay.
Does that help?
All right, that helps, yeah.
Okay. But, I mean, what I'm saying is, when you ask a creationist, okay, that's an interesting idea, now has it been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal? They say, no, because science is a conspiracy to stop me from doing that. If you ask that question and you start getting a bunch of whining, that's a pretty good indication that what you're looking at is in no way scientific.
And it's not,
I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, but these creationists, they do find, like a few creationist scientists here and there, they've all written papers and they all give it, they've all given, a list of what they think is evidence.
yeah, they have their fake science journals and all
Right,
that.
but they don't submit it to other scientists
Yeah.
outside their little
And this
circle.
peer review thing is not a cure-all, right? It's a good sort of,
flawless.
I called it a milestone, right? It's something that you have to do that in order to eventually get an accepted theory, but that's just a first step. You want to publish in journals that are respected journals by the people who are doing the research in that area. The creationist folks have created their own journals, which it's like, kind of a circle jerk of some sort. They're off in the corner.
Yeah, they're trying to create a veneer of respectability.
Veneer of respectability,
where
right?
respectability isn't possible.
It's fake stuff. So,
Of course, when it comes to the circle jerk claim, they would probably say the same thing about real scientific journals.
yeah, well, real science makes predictions that can be verified by other people. And that's the acid test. I mean, it's ultimately about reality.
And real science is also flexible, because if you come up with a theory and you come up with new facts to support or refute the theory a lot of times can be, or the idea can be modified in light of the new facts. But with like this
Plate tectonics.
hydroplate tectonics, you're talking about you're starting off with a premise that is irrefutable, that God flooded the earth, and it can never be refuted. And now, because they have this irrefutable idea, they have to go around and come up with all these explanations about how that's possible.
Fit that.
And it's
Yeah.
not science, because you can never modify or discard the initial premise that God
That's a
flooded
good
the earth.
point. The religion starts with
5,000
the
years ago.
answer and rationalizes its way to the facts, and science starts with the facts and rationalizes or
Right.
works its way through reason to an
this
answer.
seems like bending over backwards to explain the Great Flood. And, before you would bother to do that, you would first ask it to be established that there was a Great Flood in the first place. The short answer to that is there's no reason to believe that there was any such flood that covered the entire earth ever. The archaeological evidence doesn't support it.
There's a good website called talkorigins.org that has a very good taxonomy, if you will, of creationist claims and answers to them. The creationist, and you will find that you'll find this issue probably there.
If
and
you
you'll
Google
find some good
index
papers.
to creationist claims, you'll find it.
Oh, index to creationist claims. Okay. Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things because pretty much every argument you'll ever hear from a creationist is cataloged there and an answer to it. And that's a great starting point because there's often very good references to go off and read more and explore. And if you have a particular one.
And I'm looking at it right now, and
Okay.
hydroplate theory happens to be number CH420.
There you go. They're all cataloged.
So go check it out.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll let you go. I don't want to take up all your time.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you for calling.
It's actually sparked an interesting discussion there.
So we have a little under 30 minutes left, and I just want to remind people, as I always would around this time, that if you enjoyed today's program and you happen to be in Austin, then come on down to Threadgills on Riverside Drive. After the show, we'll be there around 6:30, and come on, have some good food, and meet with our our crew and us and our enormous studio audience today. Hey guys.
No kidding. We got 15 people here sitting in front of us, so we're thrilled to have them.
We appear to have full lines, but we do not have any call screening information about them. So I might as well go ahead and bring up a story, I guess.
Okay. Yeah.
There's this group called Repent Amarillo that's been in the news a bit lately.
And this has kind of got a military theme too, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, it does.
Okay.
Since the election of Barack Obama as president, radical fundamentalist Christian groups have sprung up like weeds in an ignored vacant lot. Militia groups have too, and for times, hold on. Militia groups have too, and more times than not, they mesh together and become almost indistinguishable from one another. Fundamentalist Christianity is at the root of the most virulent and potentially violent groups forming and recruiting today. Repent Amarillo is one such organization brought out of the shadows and into the news, mostly because of their outright harassment of Amarillo's citizenry. They are nothing more than wannabe brown shirts. Okay, this is not a very objective article right here.
Yeah.
The reason, I would like to state for the record that I have actually emailed Repent Amarillo to see if they would like to call into the show. They haven't responded yet.
Okay.
And they're probably flooded with people who would like to talk to them right now since they have been in the news so much.
Well, controversy is something that does a good job.
Yeah, it's always fun.
Yeah.
They've also been called the Texas Taliban. And basically, have you read much about these guys?
No, not too much.
I believe what they're doing is they're
heard of them
going
before
around.
today.
There's a video on YouTube that I saw at PZ Meyer's site where they go and hang out at a swingers club.
Oh boy.
Outside a swingers club with like a bullhorn, and they shove cameras in people's faces, and I guess those people don't always want to appear on camera.
Well, that sounds like some of the tactics some local folks used to use not too many years ago here in Austin. For in front of movie houses and that sort of thing.
Right.
So they got a kind of a military-looking
And what I heard recently is that one of them is like a security guard in a nuclear facility,
Oh,
which
boy.
is a little bit disturbing.
So this is not real military. This is fake military, right?
Well, I mean, it's a militia group, but let's see. Okay, here, this might be the better story. At first, the swinger community was mystified by the attention. On the 60-some hours of surveillance footage the Meads have, a swinger can be heard telling a Repent member that the swingers haven't done anything to bother them. "You're going to hell and it bothers me," Grisham responds. "What bothers me is you're going to hell." Perhaps the most insidious tactic Repent uses is trying to destroy the reputation of the swingers. In Amarillo, people can be ostracized over a whiff of impropriety. On one tape, Grisham directs followers to get the license plate numbers in the Route 66 parking lot. "A new couple can be here 3 or 4 hours," says Mac. "Whenever they leave, the Repent Amarillo group will call them by first and last name, know where they live, know where they work, just within a very few hours."
Oh, that's fun.
That's, especially creepy in light of the recent, abortion killings and stuff. I mean, I would not put it past these people to be violent, especially, with the militia background.
Well, it says there they're also going after churches that they believe to be insufficiently Christian.
Oh, of course.
I always find that entertaining. It's like we're not Christian.
My
enough
God's
for you.
bigger than your God.
Right. I remember that happened with the Bush administration.
That includes, by the way, Episcopalians, Christian Scientists, Unitarians. Speaking of which, wasn't Bush an Episcopalian?
I
he
think
was.
Methodist, but
I don't know.
anyway.
Sure.
But there were some hyper Christian groups going after Bush for not being Christian enough, for not being rabid enough, which I thought was pretty amusing.
Okay.
You got anything more? Or you want to go back to
no,
calls?
I'm going to go back to calls unless
Okay.
you've got anything
No,
more to say about that. It looks like we might have a silly one. Ed in Austin, hello. And
Hey, how
my
you guys
finger's
doing?
on the trigger. Hello?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. What you
Good.
got for us?
All right. Hey, the Bible teaches in the Old Testament that the Jews were the ones who had built the Egyptian pyramids, and I've been told by a couple of people that there was no proof to actually indicate that there were ever even Jews in Egypt to do that. I wonder, can y'all comment on that? Do y'all know if it's same?
There are.
Yeah, I
I don't
see
know
what
the
you're saying.
details. There are books on the subject. I think it was claimed that the Jews were among the pyramid builders in the Bible. I think that was the original claim that they were. Anyway, but
Right. I'm not sure of the answer to your question. I know I've heard that there's not good evidence to indicate that some nomadic tribe was wandering that particular area of the desert for 40 years.
Right.
But when it comes to historical stuff that underlies the background of the Old Testament, I would probably go check out Jews, God, and History by Max Dimont, D-I-M-O-N-T. He's Jewish, so I'm not sure that he's a completely objective source, but he does have a really good take on separating the history from the cultural stories.
Given how close the two countries are together, it's not impossible to think that they may have wandered in there. But
Well,
it's just,
is the modern Israel like anywhere? I mean, is it in the same physical location as the historical Israel?
I believe so.
We're not Bible people.
Bible people.
Call back when Matt's on.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the Egyptians kept very good records of their their successes and failures and these sorts of things, and that these records are still available to us. It's not perfect, of course, but if there was such an event like the Exodus, like the Bible, the historical records would reflect that, and they simply don't. So that's one issue.
I think there were some recently, like the last month or two, there were some recent archaeological findings where they had uncovered these mass graves that were actually like pretty much at the footsteps at some of these pyramids, indicating that the people who had built the pyramids, were
were very special, just because I mean the Egyptians weren't going to have just Joe Blow off the street buried near their holy sites like that.
Well,
I don't know if you've heard that.
I don't know.
too.
I mean, the pyramids were built over 60, 70 years, and this was very, very hard work by people working out in the sun with
Right.
no water. I think that they all drank, alcohol because that was the only thing that was safe to drink.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an easy life for those folks. I understand that a lot of those folks were pretty skilled, so they might have been somewhat revered. As far as burials, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of burial chambers and things in and around the pyramids. I mean, the pyramids themselves are a burial chamber, right, for the kings.
Right. Well, in the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, the lowly Jew who becomes sort of a hierarchy member of the Egyptian, government or what have you, and I sort of have doubts about that alone, because I would have thought that the Egyptians, like most royal families, are prejudiced, xenophobic, and what have you. So I don't know that they would have these open arms to some Jew.
I don't even know if you have to go so far as to find logical inconsistencies in these stories, because really, there's no telling how much of it is just completely made up, without any specific evidence for the stuff.
Right.
It seemed like a lot of Genesis is about sort of creating a genealogical map of the world, if you will, and it's a lot of it's made up, of course, and maybe all of it's made up.
Right.
But it was really sort of say these people are from this person. He was the patriarch of these folks, and Joseph did this, and these sorts of things, and pretty much the whole Genesis has this sort of flavor of, this is where this group of people came to be. This is their origin story, and how it all fits into a coherent whole.
Right.
And I don't have any reason to think that this Joseph story is any different, because it's just part and parcel of that. It's no different in many ways than the others.
Right.
Okay. Well.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Ed.
Sure.
I apologize for thinking that was a joke.
Well,
it was a good
question.
Could be.
Yes.
It was an interesting question.
Okay, now, if the studio is correct, this is also Ed in Austin coming up next.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if they recorded it accurately, but it sounds like it's a theist who would like to ask us why we don't believe in God. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome.
Are you Ed?
I'm good.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Is your name Ed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you got for us?
That's a coincidence.
Yeah, pretty coincidence. Anyways, I just want to start off by saying that you talk about how the Bible and everything within it, everything that goes in it, how really, to an extent, it has no scientific basis, right?
I wouldn't say everything, but
a lot of it.
It's a collection of stories. I mean, some of it may have some basis in truth. I mean, there may be places that existed. There may be people who existed. There are many places where we know it's false or it's self-contradictory. So, you have to take it all with a grain of salt.
Well, have you ever heard anything about the Quran?
yes.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it.
There are many things in the Quran that seem to people talking about lately about how they actually scientifically add up. Like, they're not, in the sense that supposedly the Quran talks about Big Bang Theory, even though it was written many years before.
This is an apologetic, an Islamic apologetic that's just as much BS as a lot of other stuff. So no, I don't buy it either.
Yeah. Well, what if it was that the fact that science was actually just the study of God's work, and that his work was so actually incomprehensible that you think you're disproving it, and really you're just studying what he created?
Well, I mean, if there was any reason to believe that there was a God, then obviously the science being the study of the universe would be the study of things that God has done in creating that stuff. But there isn't any reason to believe it. Unless you've got one.
The only reason I could find
is that the order of the universe and everything that they study is almost too perfect to be a complete coincidence. Now, even though the universe was created over billions of years, since the time it was, from the Big Bang, from that point, the exact order of things is almost too perfect in the sense, why is it that, it hadn't collapsed yet and it continues to expand and, everything is almost in nearly perfect order?
Do you have something to comment on that?
No, I just recognize the argument, the whole
okay.
Entropy argument, but I am no expert, so.
Why would, who's arguing that the universe is disordered and you can have order as an emergent property of the forces that exist in nature, like gravity and the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force and so on. So you can have order from these things, and we have things like crystals are a great example of you have order emerging out of the fact that it's a lower potential energy for these crystals be created rather than the chaos that would otherwise be there. So I don't see that there needs to be a God for there to be order.
Right. Well, this is also referred to as the anthropic principle. I think one of the things that theists like to say is that there has to be a very special set of conditions in order for us to be here observing the universe and talking about it, because any other configuration and there would be nothing. Is that kind of along the lines of what you were talking about?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of issues with that. Number one is that, given given any number of possible configurations that didn't lead to life, there aren't any people there saying that, saying, "Oh, isn't it miraculous?" So people talk about, isn't it amazing that here we are at this particular distance from the sun, where it's exactly warm enough for us to exist, and there's just enough oxygen for us to breathe. And then meanwhile, there are probably some nitrogen-breathing aliens somewhere on a gas giant, very, very close to the sun, in a distant galaxy, saying, "Isn't it amazing that our planet has to be in exactly the right configuration that is perfect for us to survive?" The thing is that matter does does stuff with what it's given. Douglas Adams kind of made an analogy to a sentient puddle, saying, "Isn't it amazing that this hole in the ground is exactly the right shape for me to fit in?"
And another answer is if the universe was fine-tuned for life as we know it, do the calculation of just how much of the universe the life as we know it can live in. We live on a very, very thin layer of this very, 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 very small sphere in a very, very large solar system, in a very large galaxy, in a very large set of galaxies, and there are not very many places like that. And the idea that the universe was created just for this life is really pretty absurd when you look at how big the universe is.
Well, that's what brings it back to the Quran, is that in the Quran, it is stated that God created other worlds as well.
Oh, so are you a Muslim? Just curious.
No, I just find it interesting. I just find
Well,
their belief interesting.
The Quran was written quite a bit later than the rest of the Bible. It's only 1300
700 AD.
700 AD.
Right.
I guess they hadn't developed
Or was
telescopes
it-
yet,
right.
but maybe they had a good guess.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not willing to accept that
even
claim
exceed that.
without hearing the exact
verse.
hearing the exact wording, because that people who are apologists for particular religious texts will bend over backwards to go out of their way to take some very, very vague language and then pick on a particular point of science that sounds a little bit like it, and then say, "See, that's exactly, they exactly predicted that."
Well, even if it says that, it doesn't mean anything, because the Civil War really happened, but that doesn't make Gone with the Wind a work of fact.
Right.
So, even if it does say God created other worlds, that doesn't apply anything other than that statement. That could happen on pure chance.
Sure. And I was also going to mention
and also, Muslims were not idiots. I mean, the Muslim world developed quite a lot of science.
I was going to say too that we have, the Mormon religion, which is more modern, was created whole cloth, and it was created by somebody who was pretty fascinated by other worlds, right? And the notion of astronomy and these sorts of things, and so not surprisingly, these elements made it into the Mormon religion, and I don't know. I think that all of these religions are period pieces in the sense that they capture the interests and biases and beliefs and morals and such of the people who created these holy books, and I don't see any magic, in the Bible, in the Quran, or any of these books that leads us to believe that there's real revelation there, and real science or real any sort of advance. There may be things that they got right. But it could be, and a lot of these things I think can be explained away pretty easily. I don't see any miraculous stuff in there. One example, the Ten Commandments. God supposedly came down with these tablets or whatever, and they were dropped on the floor and crumbled to pieces. Right? Well, God could have just as easily made a diamond-coated titanium tablets. Right? And that's certainly something that we can do today.
There's always Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1.
Right.
I bring you 15, 10 commandments.
Right. He drops one of the three. Yeah. Anyway. But my point is, why make this out of crumble stone or sandstone or whatever? What kind of craziness is that? Why not make it out of something, especially since this is supposedly the most valuable religious artifact ever created in the history of the universe? Why make it so something that would fall apart? That makes no sense.
That may be kind of wandering off the question.
Wandering off the question. Well, okay.
All right.
Well, it seems like that, all in all, given that if there was any truth to it, it had been distorted over long periods of time by people constantly rewriting it, rereading it, reinterpreting it, when it comes to all those things. But do you think there's any matter of truth that if God, if he existed, if he ever came to Earth, that there's any way that the actual truth of it could have been distorted?
Well, we have Thomas Paine, who was one of the sort of founders of the United States. He actually named the United States, America. He argued in his Age of Reason that God would never use a holy book as a communication device for precisely this reason. And I think he made a very compelling argument that hasn't been addressed, hasn't been knocked down at all. I think his argument is still rock solid today.
There's a really serious problem with just assuming that the guy who created the universe and he's never wrong. It gives people the idea that they're infallible by proxy. People wind up believing that maybe I don't know everything, but I have this direct phone line to the creator of the universe, and he knows everything. So if I hear something in my head, or I read something in a book that makes sense, and I think it's by him, then I have free license to go ahead and believe that whatever I think is absolutely 100% correct with no possibility of error. This, not coincidentally, has led to hundreds of horrible wars throughout the history of the universe, because when you have two groups of people who think that they've got the immutable truth and they don't agree on what that truth is, then they fight each other for it. I don't see any particular reason to believe that anybody has been told the absolute truth. I think the evidence doesn't bear it out. And the best we can do is examine the universe objectively without these assumptions of something like a God, and come to whatever conclusion is pointed to by the evidence. And so far as I can tell, God isn't it.
So, what if it was the fact that if there was a God, but he never came to Earth in the first place, but somehow his existence was still known? Again, coming back to the
How
point
is it known? That's my question. How is it known to you or anyone?
Well, the way I look at it, there's two possibilities. One, it was just created by ancient people trying to explain the crazy forces they saw around them. Or two, we could go off the crazy belief, the religious people play off of, is like God's work is supposedly, so incomprehensible, and he can put any thought into your head as he's so.
So what you're saying is it's not known, it's just a complete mystery to us, and yet you're still willing to say that, that there's definitely a God because either you feel it or you just believe unquestioningly people in the past who've said they feel it.
No, I say it because I feel that there is some kind of God, but not an intelligent being in the sentient sense that he would send down some words to some random people on Earth.
How do you know?
There is some form of God. Because, well, they're still investigating things that go into atoms.
They're still investigating it. How do you know that it's God?
Because some force is driving it, and we can't explain it yet.
Some force called God.
To an extent, yes.
How do you know?
How do I know?
Yeah, I mean,
It seems like you're
all
giving...
you're saying is there's unknown stuff, and I want to call it God.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Well, it has to lead down to something, doesn't it? To the point of creation.
Called God?
I guess if you want
Why?
to call it.
Why not just say, I don't know? Isn't that more honest?
Well, I'm using the word God just to explain the fact that I don't know.
Okay, so
No, it
I
seems like
agree
you're
with
leaping to
you.
a conclusion. This is what it sounds
I
like
agree
to
with
us.
you. If God just means I don't know, then yeah, there is an I don't know. I find little reason to be interested in that kind of word game. So anyway, thanks for your call. We've got a couple minutes left. Let's see. Should I cram in another call or two?
Yeah, let's do one more call.
Okay. We're going to have to make this quick. We've got Claire in St. Paul. We'll probably take a couple of calls off the air after the show's over, so hang in there. Claire, are you there?
Yeah.
Sorry to get you on so late.
Yeah, I knew I'd be last. So last December, I had my friend over and her son, and we were playing on the Wii, and we were just having, a fun time on the video game. And we're also talking because her son's really into geology, and we're just talking about random scientific principles. And we get into the topic of what the definition of theory means, and I tell her basically what all my science classes have told me, all the science books have told me what a scientific theory is, and she disagrees with me, eventually telling me that, hey, actually it's just a random speculation. It's not really supported by anything. It's just a...
there's two definitions, isn't there?
Yeah, which leads to something called the equivocation fallacy.
Right, where they play games with this sort of thing.
Right. But, I mean, basically in a science sense, when we say that something is a scientific theory, we mean that it's a well-supported explanation for observed facts. I'm going to put you on hold if you want to stay on after the show, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you very much, Kathleen, for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks to our great crew, and come on down to Threadgills when the show is over. And it's been another great episode. Goodbye, everyone.